Welcome, welcome to our post-General Assembly um, briefing. We are very excited to have you all here today. I'm going to start before I give a little bit of an overview and introduce our speakers. For those of you, we've had many of our members email us as we were planning our conference for the end of the month, asking about how we're going to address conversations about federal actions impacting communities. And so what we decided to do, for those of you who can stay on, after this briefing, we will turn the recording off, and we would really like to hear from you about what is happening in your communities as a result of federal actions, what you all as philanthropy, what you're thinking about, what you're questioning, what you're wanting answers to, and how VFN can best support you in this time. So that will really help us as we finalize all of the content and networking opportunities at the conference and our work to help support you going forward. So I wanted to start with that. For those that can stay on past 2 o'clock, we would love to have a conversation, an open conversation with you all. I am very excited about our legislative briefing today and the speakers that are here to share a little bit about what happened in the General Assembly, what happened with the governor's actions, and then the veto. I always call it a veto session. I think there's a more official name for that, but I always call it the veto session when the General Assembly comes back and takes their action on the governor's actions. And so we're going to hear from two wonderful folks today who come with a lot of experience. One, I think, is a face that you recognize as a part of our VFN membership. Jennie O'Halloran is with the Broad Street Group, and I've known Jennie a long time. She worked for maybe more than one governor's office in policy and advocacy, and she has done some work for Act for Alexandria. So she is familiar with the Virginia Funders Network and with philanthropy, and I think we'll have a lot of wonderful insights in giving you an overview of the hot topics from the session and sort of where things stand right now. And then Rachel Rees from the Virginia Healthcare Foundation, our new CEO. She's not new to the Virginia Healthcare Foundation, but she has new shoes to wear, and we're very excited for her for that promotion. And she is going to talk to us, obviously, about healthcare and all the legislation and actions around healthcare that impact our communities. So I think I am going to leave it there. And I think that Angie has put bios in the chat, so I won't read all those to you, but I really want to thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennie to begin our session.
Great. Thank you so much, Bess. It's great to be with you all. As Bess said, I'm going to give kind of a big picture overview and then let Rachel talk a little bit more in depth about the healthcare and health and human resources space. Big picture, the General Assembly adjourned its session on February 22nd. This was our short session, which was made even shorter because we got our start with a water crisis that sent everyone home for a few days. So it felt even more frantic than normal in the short 40 plus days that we had in Richmond. Overall, this session was, I would say, pretty much a rinse and repeat of last session. None of the political dynamics have changed. We still have a House and Senate that are both narrowly controlled by Democrats. We have a Republican in the governor's mansion, and we have a legislature, and in particular the Senate, who's not very interested in giving the governor a lot of wins. So that was kind of the setup coming into session. There were a few newer dynamics at play. First, New legislators and committee chairs had their footing a little bit more this session. So you'll mostly, I'm sure, remember that last session we had major shift in makeup of our legislature due to redistricting, retirements, a lot of new people, new leadership in both the House and the Senate, new committee chairs, and it took some time for everyone to get their sort of footing. This session, everyone knew what they were doing a little bit more. So that was good and new. Secondly, Governor Youngkin is in his last year as governor and has even sort of, according to the legislature, less leverage than he had in years past. He's on his way out. So this is his last session, not a lot of leverage over the legislature. Third, the speaker in particular is laser focused on the elections. That was sort of the undercurrent of everything that he did this session. Everything was focused on not upsetting the apple cart and making sure that there was a strategy around what he was going to do to maintain his majority. And then finally, the biggest piece, which is that the federal actions of impacts of federal actions loomed over everything this session and continue to loom, and sort of the uncertainty around that was certainly a new dynamic this year. Some of the big issues that dominated this session. First, towards the beginning of session, the big news was that the legislature passed three constitutional amendments, one that dealt with restoration of voting rights, one dealing with marriage equality, and a third on reproductive rights. These do not require the governor's signature, so the legislature had total control over their passage, but they will need to pass again in the same form next year if those are to advance. Sort of second chunk of issues, I guess, are, in 2024, the governor vetoed around 200 bills. We saw many of them again. A lot of them were in areas including gun violence prevention, environmental protections, criminal justice reform, reproductive health care. Some of these kind of going back to the speaker's priority of winning the elections. A lot of them were sort of I guess, progressive measures that were sent to him again this year. They also sent him bills focusing on a minimum wage increase, collective bargaining, some workers' issues were sent his way. Third kind of big picture thing, there was once again an ongoing conversation around gaming. There was a debate about a casino in Northern Virginia, a debate about what to do on skill games, and the bottom line is not a lot happened on that front this session. And then finally, and probably most importantly, the budget, as always, dominated the conversation. While this is the second year of the biennium, Virginia did have significant new revenues to allocate. And Governor Youngkin sought to provide car tax relief and invest in other priority areas like establishing college laboratory schools and opportunity scholarships. And the legislature had different ideas, including providing one-time tax rebates and investing in public education. There were also different approaches by the governor and legislature to address the implications of federal actions on Virginia's budget. Governor Youngkin sought to put $300 million into a discretionary revenue reserve fund that would just be available to weather any potential federal budget cuts. The General Assembly preferred to set up a process by which they would come back for a special session if our revenues were impacted by over a certain amount. And in addition, and I know Rachel will discuss this as well, both the House and Senate established special subcommittees to look at the potential effects of revenue loss due to federal policy changes and also the federal workforce reduction. Both committees have begun to meet. They've largely been sort of information gathering stage at this point, getting briefings and taking feedback from other stakeholders. While partisan tensions were high, there were some areas of agreement. Maternal health was a bipartisan priority this session, and we saw some bills pass on that front. Additionally, the governor and the legislature agreed to provide some funding to address damage from Hurricane Helene in southwestern Virginia. And I know a topic of interest to a number of you, policymakers also agreed to increase the earned income tax credit refundability from 15% to 20%. Two areas of interest, I know in addition to healthcare that Rachel will talk about, are housing and education. So I wanted to touch on those a little bit. First, in housing, on the legislative front, a number of bills that addressed affordable housing. I think we're seeing sort of in that bucket of maybe more progressive issues that the governor decided to veto. So we did not see a lot of progress on the legislative front as it relates to housing. There were a couple of bills that made smaller progress. One of those was HB 2245 from Delegate Carlson, which directs the Department of Taxation to develop a uniform income and expense reporting form for assessors that are completed by owners of affordable rental housing properties prior to the assessment of those properties. And then second, a bill from Delegate McClure and Senator Eben from Arlington and Alexandria that provides that landlords who own or have substantial interest in more than 4 rental dwelling units in the Commonwealth provide written notice of non-renewal to any tenant. So small policy changes, but bipartisan agreement, and they were signed by the governor. Um, More importantly, maybe, or as important, affordable housing was a big priority for the General Assembly in the budget. The budget conference report, so what the General Assembly passed, included $20 million to establish a rental assistance pilot program, $15 million for a first-time buyer grant program, and $13 million $13 million new dollars, excuse me, to support local housing trust funds. The governor did propose eliminating most of that funding, but the General Assembly rejected those amendments. So as of now, they're back before the governor in the budget. In education, funding for public schools was a top priority for appropriators. The General Assembly made major investments in K through 12 education, including $223 million to eliminate the support staff cap, which was a policy put in place during the 2008 recession, and has a major impact on our local school divisions funding. $53 million for special education funding, and a significant additional tranche of money for school construction and for investments in early childhood education. Overall, the legislature sent the governor 915 bills. And as you likely know, the governor has the ability to sign, amend, or veto all legislation, including the budget. He used his pen liberally during the bill review period, and the General Assembly returned last week to take up his actions. The governor ended up signing 599 bills, vetoing 157 and proposing amendments to 159. One of those bills, which was the budget, to which he proposed over 200 amendments. And I will just say that is a lot. That is a substantial amount of amendments. I know it's the most budget amendments I've ever seen on a budget. And sort of signaled the governor's maybe displeasure or difference of opinion and approach for the budget. The vastness of these actions, I think, led to legislative leaders being sort of more dug in their positions. So it kind of made everyone dig in a little bit further. And ultimately, the legislature accepted 33 of those 205 budget amendments. Most of them are kind of technical changes and not significant. And they rejected 172 others. The budget is now back on the governor's desk, and he has the ability to either sign, veto, or veto certain line items in the budget. He'll have until May 2nd to make that decision. And it's a little unclear at the moment as to what he'll do. So if you're hoping to find certainty on that on this call, I do not have it, unfortunately. I can see an argument for both sides. On the one hand, it's the second year of the biennium. We are not constitutionally required to have a budget. There's still a lot of uncertainty about what will happen at the federal level. I could see him saying this is not the right approach and vetoing the budget. Um, and he made very clear where his position was by his uh, amendments. On the other hand, Virginia's never had a governor veto a budget before. It's unprecedented. And there is a lot in there that both Republicans and Democrats want. So it would be, you know, an action that would take out a lot of his priorities in addition to the things that he is not pleased with. So the question remains what will happen with the budget and whether the legislature will return to Richmond sometime this summer or fall to deal with the impact of federal actions. And we'll learn a little bit more about that in the coming weeks. I guess the last thing to mention for now is that legislators have now sort of largely turned to elections. Sessions behind them, and they're focused on both the statewide elections and the House of Delegates races. I think most folks believe that Democrats will have the upper hand in the elections, given the unpopularity of the president and Virginia's history of sort of swinging the opposite way of the presidential election. But there's a long way between now and election day. And I know both parties are acting as if they're coming from behind and working it. And that's a big picture recap. Happy to turn it to Rachel. Um, or take questions now, whatever best you think is best.
So we have one question from VFN's board chair. Thanks, Dan. He's asking, let's see. Can you repeat what you said about the housing proposals for additional rental assistance, first-time home buyers, and additional housing trust fund? Were they rejected by the governor?
Yes. So the
Okay.
governor proposed eliminating most of those funds. He proposed keeping a portion of, I think, the first-time homebuyer fund. Um, all of those amendments, though, were rejected by the General Assembly, so they did not accept those amendments. So they are now back before the governor for it'll be part of the budget review.
Mhm, mhm. And he could line item those out.
Um, he could, but it would be, but it's none of those are an independent item, so they're all
Okay.
tied up with something else. So he'd have to
Okay.
take down some other stuff with it too.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, Patty, can I ask Jenny one thing to maybe clarify or just repeat for the slower learners like me? When you said that he will either veto the whole thing or he will approve it or do not, but so the line item stuff is not an option anymore, right? Like it's either all or nothing.
It is the line item veto is an option. Um,
Okay.
and he certainly could choose to do that. He can only line item vetoes, I'm sorry, line item veto items for which he proposed amendments to. So it's not, the whole budget is not open back up. It's only now he did send down 200 amendments. So there are quite a few for him to review. And an item might not just be like one, like the rental assistance fund, for example, is not an item in and of itself. It would be within Department of Housing and Community Development's item. So you kind of take down a whole bunch of stuff with it if you line item veto it. Um, so the short answer is yes, that's an option. The longer answer is it's a little more complicated than just crossing things off.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Jenny, just for clarity, because this is the second year of this next year will be the second year of the biennium. If he should choose to veto the whole budget, we still have a budget. It was the second year of the budget that was approved last time.
Correct.
Yes.
So there will be a whole bunch of funding that is sitting there and not appropriated, but we do have
Hmm.
sort of an operational
Hmm.
budget to go
Yep.
by.
Thank you. Okay, Rachel, are you ready to chat about healthcare?
Yes, I'm ready to chat about healthcare in my new shoes. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's a thrill to see so many familiar faces. I'm really excited to see you all in person, or hopefully many of you at the conference later this month. And thank you to BFN for pulling us all together consistently, but also in this moment, which is so important. I got distracted. To learn more about me, you can visit the link that Angie just put in there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hold on one second. Delay. There we go. How's that? Is that good? Okay, great. Well, so what I would love for you to take away from my time with you today are actions that are opportunities to increase access to care in Virginia. As Jenny talked about, my remarks will hone in mostly on things related to the HHR budget and legislative items. I'll touch on a couple of larger picture pieces because everything is just so interconnected, at this time. And yes, there are any number of significant unknowns, particularly as it relates to HHR, which includes the Medicaid budget. But I don't want that to totally overshadow the things that are in this budget and the legislative items that are helpful as it relates to healthcare. So we'll have a conversation about that. As Jenny stated, we started with a shorter session. A picture paints 100 words better than anything. So here we have outside of the Capitol, in Richmond, we had this water crisis. And so that meant the session started, the short session started late. That's too many S's for one sentence. And started with porta potties and a short session. But they got a tremendous amount done in a compressed period of time with a little bit of a dramatic start. And as Jenny said, there were any number of Virginia key dynamics at play, including Youngkin's final budget, an eye towards the elections in the fall, particularly the House of Delegates, and a state surplus. And at the time in December, right before they gavelled in, there was a state surplus of $3.2 billion and differing ideas about what to do with that and what not to do with that. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about also the timing of the leadership change at the federal level as it relates to the General Assembly coming into session. So the deadline for filing bills was just a few days before actually Trump was before his inauguration. And then, of course, we've seen the speed, depth, and breadth of the federal changes that made it, people have talked about whiplash or difficulty of understanding what's happening and when. And there's some things that we know and some things that we don't know. And just in terms of things that we do know as it relates to federal funds in our budget, 30% of Virginia's budget is funded with federal dollars. And there's a higher percentage of that, as you might imagine, in the HHR budget as it relates to Medicaid. And this is important. This was talked at the previous session that BFN hosted related to the trigger language, specifically referencing how Medicaid expansion, MedEx, is funded. Virginia is one of 9 of the states in the nation with this language. And to simplify a very complicated topic, if the federal match or share for that population, the MedEx population, which is 19 to 64, and it's providing healthcare coverage to over 600,000 individuals, Virginians right now. If that match even changes by 1%, it requires the end of that program. The good news is, as Jenny had talked about, we're in a special session and the General Assembly can come back in to reconvene should that happen. And there are, excuse me, the pollen is still in the air, even though it rained. Of course, the impact of the federal workforce being reduced could have serious negative impacts, not just on Virginia, Virginia in a number of ways, but including its economy. We rank third highest in terms of number of federal employees in Virginia, and 40% of our income revenues come from Northern Virginia. So put another way, everything in Virginia is linked to the Northern Virginia economy, right? So, and all that being said, the key takeaway I want to spend the majority of my time talking about is, even within that context, a lot of things got done in the HHR budget. It comprises the largest amount of general fund spending. And a lot of the things that Youngkin put in his budget were carried through by the General Assembly members. And overall, there was a lot of consensus. Two interesting things to note: the majority of funding increases within this budget went to two major actions. One, to fund the shortfall of for Medicaid spending, and that was just over $700 million. And then the required funding increase for the Children's Services Act, which is related to foster care. So once those things were funded, it actually didn't leave a tremendous amount of funds with which to allocate across a really large secretariat. And the items that they did take into priority are listed here. Jennie mentioned one of them: maternal mortality, behavioral health, health workforce, health insurance coverage, and some additional funding to the healthcare safety net. In each of these, there was some give and take at different points in the budget process, whether that was from the General Assembly's initial actions and the governor's veto. But in the end, these are all areas that are moving forward, and in my view, with some opportunities that will increase access to care in Virginia. And I think as we turn our conversations to what can philanthropy be doing during this time, one is to be aware that these things are happening, because funding is just one piece of the puzzle. The other part is how all of this gets implemented, how people become aware of these changes. And I think that's an important role that philanthropy can have. So I'm going to touch base on these all at a really high level. If you're interested in learning more, you can put a question in the chat. Somebody from our team will definitely get back to you on more of the details. But for today's purposes, I'll give you a higher level view of each of this. So first, maternal mortality. So Black mortality for women in Virginia is 3 times greater than their white counterparts. And this is an area that's had bipartisan support. It's been an area of priority also for the governor. And excuse me, this pollen, hang tight. So the package itself is under this fun kind of title of Momnibus package. And really, it's a bunch of initiatives, state funding and legislative items that are intended to address maternal mortality and mental health. And so they're listed here. Those with an asterisk are actually budget amendments. There are a couple of things still in play. For example, funding for doulas is something that the governor put in, the assembly took out, and the governor's put back in. So we'll see how that lands. But there's any number of things here related to expanding access to maternal health care, items related to workforce to expand access to maternal health care, including independent practice for nurse midwives. There was a nice piece in the Cardinal News about this, actually just last week. I encourage you to take a look at it. And to establish a commission on women's health, which is something that will be done moving forward. So I think that there's good momentum in this area. It's a statewide issue and something each of your organizations could get involved in. Another area that has had support both in the governor's office and the legislature is actions to improve youth mental health. Some of these are really kind of technical things like Jennie talked about. Like this first one is a small language change that just broadens the number of organizations schools can partner with in order to provide school-based mental health services. There's efforts to streamline access of telemental health in schools, and then a study in particular to look at the outcomes of school-based mental health services. So some positive outcomes there as well. Another area of growth is expanding the Marcus alert system. This is something that the governor put in and the General Assembly actually expanded funding for, and it provides a system of response for people who are experiencing behavioral health crisis. Funding to the Medical Society of Virginia to expand its adult psychiatric access line, and then funding to support Community Services Board. So growth in those areas as well. Won't spend too much time on this slide, except to point out really the first two, and all of these are related to the public mental health system. The first is to increase reimbursement for substance use disorders, and then a plan to assess the state of the aging mental health facilities in Virginia, which is a significant issue. I'm sure many of you have heard Commissioner Nelson talk about this. Needs long-term planning and has also gotten some attention. There was also some efforts to streamline the bed registry and some other smaller items as well. So as it relates to health professional shortages, here the key takeaway for all of us is to know that we have shortages in almost every single key health professional type in Virginia. All of Virginia remains a mental health professional shortage area, and the number of primary care providers in Virginia have been declining steadily since 2019. So this is an area that is of significant importance to all of us as Virginians. And there were a number of efforts here taken. I won't go through all of them. The first one actually involves any number of schools, JMU, Radford, University of Mary Washington, and others to expand their nursing programs. That second one is very specific. It allows licensed foreign dental program graduates to teach at VCU to expand their capacity. And then there were other funding opportunities that were invested in to increase the number of licensed professionals here in Virginia. Continuing with this theme of increasing access to health professionals, expanding the scope of services, scope of practice for a number of professions, including nurse midwives. That was also in that article that I was talking about. I'd be happy to send it to Patty so she can share it with you. And some studies to look at expanding physician assistants, scope of practice, and prescriptive authority for clinical licensed psychologists. Not stopping there, they also looked at Medicaid, actions related to health insurance. These first three were related to the actions taken or actions that resulted in the study that was done in 2024 about Medicaid's enrollment system. They're intended to streamline the application process. So hopefully those will have a positive impact. And then there's some more specific reimbursement items here, as you can see, related to specific disease states or rare disease testing. One thing I'm interested in following moving forward is a study for remote monitoring of members with chronic disease. I think that could be something of promise moving forward as well. And I won't dwell very long here, but there were some actions taken as well to look at establishing a work group to review the essential health benefits and streamlining prior authorization processes as well. So I pulled this one up, actions to support the health safety net. They're interesting and I will talk about them, but I think that they are important in this larger context where we could see more uninsured individuals if the Medicaid program is reduced. So there were $500,000 each. In the end, there was some back and forth here, but in the end, the budget that's back in front of the governor has $500,000 each to the Free Clinic Association and the Association of Community Health Centers. And then this last bullet is $1 million to the Community Association for federally qualified health centers that would provide non-emergency transportation for uninsured patients. And this came out of the recommendation on the Committee for Rural Health Studies that Speaker Scott started, and then Delegate Willett chaired. Excuse me. So this mirrors what Jennie shared with you, and kind of gets us into the, I just talked about all the things we think we know, and it takes us into the space of what we don't know. And I won't repeat what she said, but it is, you know, even if, and just to add to things to consider, is even if the budget is finalized, you know, the General Assembly may have to reconvene if there are, if Congress takes actions that substantially reduce Medicaid, and that trigger language is activated, you know, we would anticipate a special session to address whatever actions occur. So we very much are, this is not the end of the story. We're in another chapter of it, and these are the things that we need to stay engaged in. This is simply a list of the special committees that are running that Jennie mentioned. One of them actually met this morning. And so the legislature is trying to work really hard to have a solid understanding of the economic drivers that could be impacted by the federal policy changes that are being considered, particularly as it relates to the workforce. These are, I think, just to remind you all, if you're interested in listening, they stream these, and you're welcome to listen in. And we'd be happy to share with those links with everybody if that would be helpful. But if you're curious what they're talking about, you know, I encourage you to hop in and listen. This is something that really has become more available since the pandemic, and is a great resource for staying in touch with what they're talking about. So finally, and you know, I'll leave just sort of this thought here, and it'll feed into the conversations I think afterwards, is there's a really unique moment for philanthropy, in my opinion, in this moment in time. One, for a variety of reasons. One, we have a strong community of funders here in Virginia, and we have the advantage of having an association that pulls us together to have conversations. So making the most of your connections and learning from each other is going to be essential during this period of time. But I also think the innovation, the solutions, the ideas will be generated more at a local level during this period of time. And you all have your finger on the pulse of your communities, and will be able to see what the needs are, and to give voice to them and partner with those organizations. So I do think, though very challenging, and the amount of unknowns can certainly feel overwhelming, I just would encourage us to make the most of our resources, which include each other and your knowledge of your community. And we can talk about these other items that are here in our conversations afterwards, but making sure that your legislators and representatives are informed of the issues you're concerned about is critical. And actually the spring and summer is a great time to be doing that work. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back to the VFN team.
Thank you, Rachel, very much. That was very informative. I saw a few questions in the chat. One is related to healthcare, so and healthcare workforce. So I'm going to ask that. And then one is not. So Jennie, I don't know if there's anything that you can answer about this, but related to the healthcare, I'm just going to read on March 24th, the Central Shenandoah Health District lost their funding for all their community health workers positions following CDC action regarding regarding the former COVID-19 funding. Were there any proposals and amendments in the discussions to add or replace funding for community health workers?
That has been, hi Dan, it's great to hear from you. I had the pleasure of working with Dan at VFN's last year's conference. So we're buddies. It's good to see you. Funding of community health workers has been an ongoing conversation, not just in this particular context, but in others. You may be aware that there was, looking at trying to figure out if it could be funded by Medicaid at different points in time. And as it relates to this most recent cut that you're referencing just from last week, I'm not aware of any actions that were taken to replace the funding that you're talking about related to the most recent round of cuts. So.
There was also a question about anything during the session, probably budget related or otherwise related to arts and culture. Did the General Assembly?
So I did not follow the full scope of those efforts. So I'm sure there are items that I'm unaware of, but I do know that the General Assembly provided an additional $2 million in one-time funding for the Virginia Commission for the Arts, which, as you all know, provides grants to communities for those types of arts and cultural programs. So the governor did propose a reduction to that addition, and then the General Assembly rejected it. So that's back with the governor for now. So, but it was a priority to invest more in the Virginia Commission for the Arts.
Thank you, Jenny. So now it's really open questions. I don't think I missed any in the chat, unless my colleagues from VFN see any that that I missed. But and if so, if you want to raise your hand, maybe if you have a question for either both or either of our speakers here today that they didn't address. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but I just want to make sure that I don't miss anybody who'd like to ask something. I'm going to just pose one question to get us started. What advice do you have for funders? And I know that Rachel, you gave a few what can funders do now, but what advice do you have for funders for what they might be doing over the course of this year? I know, Jenny, you're in your work with Act for Alexandria. You got to know a little bit more about the role of philanthropic boards and what organizations. But what advice might you give to this group of philanthropic leaders on what actions they could be considering doing over the next 12 to 24 months?
I have a few thoughts, and I'm sure Rachel may have others. I would first of all just plus one what she said about the importance of getting involved now and making sure that your sort of positions or priorities are made clear to legislators, and that the off season, sort of the spring and summer, is a really good time to make those connections. I would also say that it's a great time to build relationships that don't involve a specific ask. So, inviting them to an event or meeting for coffee to hear about their priorities, signing up for their newsletters to hear sort of what's on their mind and where there might be a connection are all great ways. And then, once a relationship is established, then it's a lot easier to come to them with a specific ask down the road. Two other pieces that, maybe three other pieces that might be worth considering. One is if your organization is interested in advocacy but has not sort of broached that subject, setting up some guidelines or having that conversation with your board now about, if and when you are to engage in advocacy, what that looks like, and just kind of knowing what the rules of the game are, so that if something pops up, which it certainly will over the next 12 to 24 months, sort of what triggers like the appropriate time for your organization to get involved. The second thing, or third thing, I guess, is that the advocacy doesn't always look like what you would normally think of lobbying, and roaming the halls of the General Assembly and whining and dining legislators and that sort of thing. There are a lot of ways to engage in advocacy. I have found, especially during this time, that legislators and staff, I don't want to forget staff, because sometimes that they're even more important to build relationships with than legislators themselves. But they are seeking data, they're seeking research, economic analyses, storytellers. This is one place where I think philanthropy can be helpful too, is identifying real people who are impacted by policy changes. Legislators would much rather hear from real people than from lobbyists like me, about why something needs to change. And you all have those connections within your communities, and within your networks. So, funding research, supporting convenings that are sort of educational opportunities. Those are often gaps where the traditional lobbying space doesn't have that capacity. So that would be super helpful. And then the last piece, is that there's strength in numbers. So, of course, VFN is a great place. There are other coalitions that you can plug into, to lift your voice up. I know with ACT, we talked a lot about how the Alexandria delegation is often on the same page as the foundation. And, how do they amplify their voice? Well, teaming up with a foundation or another philanthropic entity in another part of the state might be a way to, amplify your voice and also create some buy-in from people around the state. Those are a few thoughts.
Thank you, Jennie. One of the organizations, and to that point, about your learning and about signing up and understanding what issues are in front of communities, our colleague Marianne Doyle from the Center for Nonprofit Excellence has an excellent newsletter. And in fact, we partnered with CNE this year to do some bill tracking, and to share information with you all in our policy and advocacy updates over the course of the session. So they're doing a lot of conversations with the nonprofit community in Virginia, and your grantees. And so what's really top of mind for them. So I encourage you to sign up for CNE's newsletter if you have not done so. Robin, do you have your hand raised? I'm trying to.
I
Oh,
do.
good.
Thank
I'm
you,
gonna.
Bess.
I'm good.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to thank both Rachel and Jennie for your comments, but hop on Jennie's comments about understanding what is possible for you and your organization to do in terms of policy and advocacy, and put in a plug for those of you who are able to attend the annual conference at the end of the month for VFN. There will be a session on Monday afternoon, the first day, on policy and advocacy, and we have a terrific speaker who is going to be talking about exactly that. What are the legal rules of the road for foundations and funders, no matter what type you are and what you're able to do in terms of policy and advocacy? And then a number of great speakers talking about what they're doing in their foundations. So I just wanted to encourage, for those of you who are coming to the annual conference, that would be a great session to attend on Monday afternoon, the 28th. So thank you both for your comments.
Thank you, Robin. We have one more question in the chat, Rachel. You touched on the Medicaid trigger law. What are your thoughts on the outlook related to cuts in Virginia? The crystal ball. Do you have a crystal ball? We've talked about that earlier today.
Yeah, I would say I will answer that question, but I also wanted to build upon and add a plus one exactly to everything that Jennie said, and also flip the opportunity of focus a little bit on the organizations that we support, and how to help them prepare for this moment. I'm sure all of the funders, all of us as funders, are hearing a lot of distress from the organizations that we support. They're front facing, they're seeing the patients, clients, the people in the community. And, like change management 101 is define the path, and we can't define it. And that in and of itself is expends energy and worry. And so some of the things we've been talking about here is helping people to focus on what is known in terms of timing. Like to that point right now, we know that we have that federal funding through September 30th. What can you do in that period of time to help prepare yourself from an advocacy perspective? Yes. And also within your organizations, we're asking folks to take a look at their funding streams. How diverse are they? How reliant are they on federal funding or state funding? And start doing scenario planning. If you get a cut of this, then what does it mean? There is this little quiet, doesn't feel quiet, but we're waiting, right? So what can we do within this waiting period that can prepare ourselves? And by ourselves, I mean the organizations that we support. So I think that will also arm them to be better advocates, because they'll be able to say this cut will result in X number of people, in this scenario, or a patient story, or that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to put that there as well. So because I do think the only antidote for suffering sometimes is action, and planning in itself is an action. And so what my crystal ball, I think, what was the question? Was the question really a crystal ball question?
It was a crystal ball question. I'm going to say,
yeah.
You touched on the trigger law. It was really about the trigger law. What are your thoughts on the outlook related to cuts in Virginia?
I think we should, honestly, I think we don't know what it's going to look like. Do I think that things, because there is a need that the budgets that have been proposed have significant tax cuts. I'm talking about at the federal level, and you need to fund them in some way. I would be very surprised if, and I think everybody I'm hearing is saying the same thing, it's very hard to look at that happening without cuts to Medicaid. And so I think Medicaid expansion is an area that we should be taking a look at and being prepared for. Other cuts may come from additional benefits that have been added over time. But I couldn't say this is what's going to happen, but I think it would be prudent to be prepared for a future where we're talking about that there are cuts. But that's just one step. And then what Virginia's response is will be another step, and then the timing of it. And so it really takes me back to how we spend our summer is going to be pretty important, for not only from engaging in with policy leaders and on topics that are important to you, but the organizations that we support, how can we help them as it relates to scenario planning and that kind of thing. So yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball, and then we'd be having a different webinar. Yeah. So
I think that's true. We've had a lot of conversations about crystal balls.
yeah.
One of the things that occurred to me, and you mentioned the two, I forgot the exact names, but the two special committees, there's one on the Senate and one for the House I know the House one's Speaker Scott's is the emergency committee that are meeting, and thanks for putting that information up on the slide. But I think on that website, and I think we should probably provide a link, Patty, the list of the membership of those committees, I think, is on that at each of the separate committees. And so in your communities, you may know those folks or run into them in the grocery store. And I think that very much that question, what are they hearing? What are they thinking? If you pose to them, you might get some feedback from them about what they're thinking, and what questions they're asking, because I think that's really what, at least the first session that I listened to, they were really asking questions and collecting data and information.
Exactly.
Any last questions this has been great, and I really appreciate both of you spending time with our membership this year. in this very uncertain time with no real crystal balls, but maybe some positive outcomes that and opportunities for positive outcomes. So I think with that, Angie, I think we'd love to have you all stay on if you want to hear, and we really would love to